Third video on violence, discrimination and neglect towards Tibetan children, a report submitted to the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child on violations of the Convention on the Rights of the Child by the People's Republic of China against the children of Tibet. And it is from Tibet Justice Center, California. 2. The committee's previous concerns and recommendations. In its prior concluding observations, CRC C15, additional at 7th June 1996, the committee made the following comments relevant to the issues we address here. As we will document below, China has not made progress in addressing any of these concerns. 17. The committee remains concerned about the actual implementation of the civil rights and freedoms of children. The committee wishes to emphasize that the implementation of the child's right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion should be ensured in the light of the holistic approach of the Convention, and that limitations on the exercise of this right can only be placed in conformity with paragraph 3 of Article 14 of the Convention. 19. The committee shares the concern expressed by the State Party as regards the number of children in China who still do not attend school. It is also concerned about reports that school attendance in minority areas, including the Tibet Autonomous Region, is lagging behind, that the quality of education is inferior, and that insufficient efforts have been made to develop a bilingual education system which would include adequate teaching in Chinese. These shortcomings may disadvantage Tibetan and other minority pupils applying to secondary and higher level schools. 20. In the framework of the exercise of the right to freedom of religion by children belonging to minorities, in the light of Article 30 of the Convention, the committee expresses its deep concern in connection with violations of human rights of the Tibetan religious minority. State intervention in religious principles and procedures seems to be most unfortunate for the whole generation of boys and girls among the Tibetan population. 22. Additionally, the committee remains concerned about the extent to which adequate safeguards are in place within the present system of juvenile justice in China. In this context, the committee expresses concern with respect to the access of parents during the pre-trial detention of their children, the possibilities for the provision of legal assistance to children, the sufficiency of the time allocated for the preparation of a child's defense, as well as respect for the presumption of innocence and the principle of nullum crimen sine lege, nulla poena sine lege, as reflected in Article 40, paragraph 2a. 40. The committee suggests that a review be undertaken of measures to ensure that children in the Tibet Autonomous Region and other minority areas are guaranteed full opportunities to develop knowledge about their own language and culture, as well as to learn the Chinese language. Steps should be taken to protect these children from discrimination and to ensure their access to higher education on an equal footing. 41. The committee recommends that the state parties seek a constructive response to the concerns expressed in paragraph 20 above. 42. The committee concurs concurs with the contents of the observations adopted by the Committee Against Torture, where the points raised are relevant to the situation of children below the age of 18. The committee recommends that through a review of the legislative and administrative measures and procedures in place within the state party in relation to juvenile justice be reviewed to ensure their conformity with the principles and provisions of the Convention, notably its Articles 37, 39 and 40, and other instruments relevant to the field of the administration of juvenile justice. We also note that several other treaty bodies, in the course of reviewing China's compliance, have made special note of continuing evidence of human rights violations against the Tibetan people, which are relevant here. For example, the Committee Against Torture, in its concluding observations, stated, 116. The committee is concerned about the continuing allegations of serious incidents of torture, especially involving Tibetans and other national minorities. In addition, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, in its concluding observations, observed 244. While noting the state party's information in this regard, some members of the committee remain concerned with regard to the actual enjoyment of the right to freedom of religion by people belonging to national minorities in the state party, particularly in the Muslim part of Xinjiang and in Tibet. The committee recalls that a distinctive religion is integral to the identity of several minorities and urges the state party to review legislation and practices that may restrict the right of persons belonging to minorities to freedom of religion. 245. While recognizing efforts made which have resulted in an increased number of schools and a decrease of illiteracy in minority regions, the committee is concerned about continuous reports of discrimination with regard to the right to education in minority regions, with particular emphasis on Tibet, and recommends that the state party urgently ensure that children in all minority areas have the right to develop knowledge about their own language and culture as well as the Chinese, and that they are guaranteed equal opportunities, particularly with regard to access to higher education. In addition, the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education, in her report to her mission to China, 2003, at page 2, made the following comments with respect to education in China. China's law does not yet conform to the international legal framework defining the right to education. Its constitution defines education as an individual duty, adding a right to receive education. Freedom to impart education is not recognized, nor is teachers' freedom of association, and religious education remains prohibited. Therefore, the Special Rapporteur recommends that China's law be reviewed using the yardstick of its international human rights obligations so that human and minority rights can be integrated in education policy, law, and practice. China's international obligations include ensuring free education for all school-aged children through the elimination of all financial obstacles. However, the private cost of public education precludes access to school, and it is the most important reason for non-attendance and school abandonment. We request that the committee take note not only of its own prior observations, but those of other treaty bodies and United Nations agencies and rapporteurs. They reveal a persistent pattern of rights violations against the Tibetan people in general and against Tibetan children in particular. As a specific recommendation, we suggest that the committee invite the special rapporteurs on torture and on the right to education to participate in the review of China's second periodic report. 3. Maltreatment by state actors, arbitrary detention in inhumane conditions, torture, and other cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment and punishment. A. The legal context, pertinent provisions of the CRC. A number of provisions of the CRC prohibiting discrimination and protecting children's rights to freedom of thought, conscience, religion, expression, and assembly are relevant here. Our findings show that Tibetan children continue to be detained and tortured or mistreated while in detention because they have expressed allegiance to their own culture and history, or to the Dalai Lama, or because they are merely Tibetan. The CRC provides in pertinent part. Article 2. States parties shall respect and ensure the rights set forth in the present convention to each child within their jurisdiction without discrimination of any kind, irrespective of the child's or his or her some words are missing. The child shall have the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, either orally, in writing, or in print, in the form of art, or through any other media of the child's choice. Article 14. States 1. States parties shall respect the right of the child to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Article 15.1. States parties recognize the rights of the child to freedom of association and to freedom of peaceful assembly. Article 24.1. States parties recognize the right of the child to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health and to facilities for the treatment of illness and rehabilitation of health. States parties shall strive to ensure that no child is deprived of his or her right of access to such health care services. Article 19.1. States parties shall take all appropriate legislative, administrative, social, and educational measures to protect the child from all forms of physical or mental violence, injury or abuse, neglect or negligent treatment, maltreatment or exploitation, including sexual abuse while in the care of parents, legal guardians, or any other person who has the care of the child. Article 28. States parties shall take all appropriate measures to ensure that school discipline is administered in a manner consistent with the child's human dignity and in conformity with the present convention. Article 30. In those states in which ethnic, religious or linguistic minorities or persons of indigenous origin exist, a child belonging to such a minority or who is indigenous shall not be denied the right in community with other members of his or her group to enjoy his or her own culture, to profess and practice his or her own religion, or to use his or her own language. Article 32(1). States parties recognize the right of the child to be protected from economic exploitation and from performing any work that is likely... something missing. Parents... Oh, it's not so good. I can't find it. That is likely, yes, to be hazardous or to interfere with the child's education or to be harmful to the child's health or physical, mental, spiritual, moral or social development. In addition, the CRC contains specific provisions addressing arbitrary detention, process of law, and torture or other abuse while in detention. The CRC provides, Article 37, states parties shall ensure that a. No child shall be subjected to torture or other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. B. No child shall be deprived of his or her liberty unlawfully or arbitrarily. The arrest, detention, or imprisonment of a child shall be in conformity with the law and shall be used only as a measure of last resort and for the shortest appropriate period of time. C. Every child deprived of liberty shall be treated with humanity and respect for the inherent dignity of the human person, and in a manner which takes into account the needs of persons of his or her age. D. Every child deprived of his or her liberty shall have the right to prompt access to legal and other appropriate assistance, as well as the right to challenge the legality of the deprivation of his or her liberty before court or other competent, independent and impartial authority, and to a prompt decision on any such action. Article 34. States parties undertake to protect the child from all forms of sexual exploitation and sexual abuse. We find that China continues to violate those provisions. Tibetan children are detained arbitrarily, often without formal charges or a hearing of any kind, let alone the assistance of counsel. Tibetan children are subjected to torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment and punishment, including sexual abuse and forced labor when detained, in school and in other circumstances. And this maltreatment takes place in a context of pervasive anti-Tibetan discrimination. B. China's three-level detention system. As the Tibet Information Network has explained, detention facilities in China fall into three categories. Prisons, Chinese Yingyu, and reform through labor centers, Chinese Laogai, hold prisoners who have been criminally sentenced through the juridical system. Re-education through labor centers, Chinese Lao Jiao, for prisoners sentenced administratively by officials of the Bureau of Re-education through Labor. PSB, Public Security Bureau, detention centers, Chinese Kang Shu Su, for police, prosecutorial or court investigation and other non-process detention. The majority of detained Tibetan children are held in PSB detention centers or in the re-education through labor center, colloquially known as TRISAM. As the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention found in 1994, China's re-education through labor practices in Tibet constitute unlawful arbitrary detention. Moreover, the lack of any sentence has meant that authorities can detain citizens for indefinite periods. Administrative detention, which generally means detention authorized by executive rather than judicial authority or discretion, violates international law in nearly all cases. Thus, police absent any judicial, administrative, or other official supervision often exercise long-term authority over detainees, including most detained children, which may enable the perpetration of torture and other abuses with greater impunity because of the lack of transparency and accountability in these facilities. Furthermore, because PSB detention centers are intended to serve only short-term detainees, it is less likely that they will contain adequate provision for long-term prisoners, sufficient beds protecting from the cold and hygienic facilities. In sum, China's preference for punishing children by administrative rather than judicial sentencing leaves detained children, as the UN General Assembly has recognized, particularly vulnerable to abuse, victimization and the violation of their rights. Yeah, we continue in fourth video. Thank you.